Aloha kākou, o wau no o Kaolino Kaimana Yasuoka. O keia ko'u kumu lehua ka vai kapu o ka lani hiuet. Kumu has been an inspiration for the title and the intentions embedded in this next module. From the start of the pandemic, Kumu quickly shifted and reached out to the community to ku ho'omalu. Kumu, can you please share with us the meaning of the phrase ku ho'omalu and why you used it early in the pandemic?
You know, from the beginning of this pandemic, I introduced the phrase ku ho'omalu, to stand, to protect, but to do that with a sense of peace and harmony, because it included our kupuna, our makua, and our keiki. And we wanted to give them a sense in this protectedness, comfort. And ku ho'omalu, stand. Outlast this epidemic. Stand. Do what we need to do. Stand. Protect our families, our grandparents, our parents, and our parents. Together, collectively. Let's ku ho'omalu and move forward from this COVID-19 pandemic. Mahalo.
Ku pa ku kapali o Nihoa i kamakani. The cliffs of Nihoa stand strongly against the wind, said of someone who stands bravely in the face of challenges. This olelo no'eau speaks towards the module's title, Ku Ho'omalu, and recognizes the many people in Hawaii who are standing firm in various ways to support one another through this pandemic. Mahalo for joining us on this journey. The pandemic is now stretching beyond a year, and some of us might be feeling something called COVID fatigued, where we are done with it all and we just want to go on with our lives. Thus, I would like to share through Module 3 why we need to continue to ku ho'omalu, to remain steadfast and vigilant in protection of one another. Critical to all of this is our need to analyze our individual situations while putting together the individual pieces of the puzzle to see what pathway will work best as we continue to navigate through this pandemic. Why is this important? Because the CDC has found that members of organizations and workplaces want to feel safe because feeling safe eases stress, anxiety, and reduces a different kind of fatigue, our mental and emotional fatigue. It is hoped that this module will be able to decrease the anxiety and stress some of us feel when we don't feel there is adequate protection in the spaces that we find ourselves, and can provide information to organizations and workspaces that want to be able to continue while minimizing the risks. Throughout the pandemic, we have seen how everything can come to a standstill. Sports, movie sets, schools, fitness centers, to name a few, when an individual tests positive with COVID-19. Since we all want to avoid the need to quarantine, isolate, this module is meant to help to provide information that will lower risks. What are the best ways we can continue to keep ourselves, our ohana, families, and communities safe? The multi-layered approach. The visual here is at the heart of this module. In a moment, I will ask you to take a moment to pause the video and focus on the image. Write down or mentally note all the different details in this visual. When you are done, restart the video. Great job seeing all the different ways a person can take layered protections as both personal responsibilities and shared responsibilities. Now, do you see that little mouse in the middle? Even with all the layers of protection, there might be things that are out of our control, like the variants. Because we can't always predict everything about this virus and its variants, the more layers we use, the more likely we are to cover some of those holes. Let's examine the protective practices that we do have control over. These are masking up, physical distancing, washing our hands, hand hygiene, avoiding large gatherings, proper ventilation practices, and self-isolating or quarantining. Some of you might be wondering, does Malama and Ho'omalu caring for and protecting each other make a difference? Let's read the data on this chart. What do you think it's revealing? Why was our rate of transmission, our rate of positive cases, so low in April? If you said it was because we were in a stay-at-home order, you are right. At that time, we were using the strictest protective protocol. Why did it start to go up again? Reopening, more people out and about, more possibility for exposure. Overall, throughout our communities, there was a collective understanding that together we could stand in the protection of each other. Thus, Hawaii has shown that our behavior and choices individually and collectively do make a difference. This data is great, But some of us may be wondering, do these protective practices even matter anymore? According to UH Manoa John A. Burns School of Medicine epigeneticist Dr. Aliko Mauna Kea, quote, "The protective practices are simply general common sense practices that should be taken to avoid the spread of any communicable disease. It would be especially important to continue these practices at schools where vaccines are not available for young children at the current time, but also when seasonal diseases like flu come in. We also suffer from other tropical diseases as well, and it will only get mingled when tourism is in full force. I think what your module teaches, or actually reinforces, is the need to practice good hygiene and has strong public health implications." Close quote. During the pandemic, not only were our protective measures supporting us in keeping our case numbers down, great job, Hawaii, but across the globe, these same protective practices were extremely effective with keeping the flu out of our families and communities. In a Scientific American article by Katie Peak published on April 29, 2021, the headlines noted, "Across the U.S., rather than the usual flu deaths numbering in the tens of thousands, there were 600 mortalities." Thus, as you can see, continuing these protective practices are not only helping us to get through this pandemic, but they also help us to get through other communicable diseases. Some people might say that this is fear-mongering, but one thing that Kumukawai Kapuokalani teaches our class about indigenous perspective, Kanaka Maoli perspective, is that Kupuna believe in being informed and being prepared, that knowledge is power, and that it is how we use that power that matters. He has chosen during this whole pandemic to use it to responsibly care for himself and his community. We can use staying informed as a means to protect ourselves. Towards this end, even prior to the pandemic, Kumu shared with us how when he would travel to teach, he knew that it was his job to stay healthy, so he would wear a mask and he would keep his hands clean and sanitized. He believed in the practices because he saw them work for him. Another reason why it makes sense to continue to use protective practices has to do with the variants. The longer the COVID-19 virus is spreading, the number of variants found will increase. This is why we need to ensure that we support other countries in receiving the vaccine, because we all need to get COVID-19 under control. You might be wondering why the variants pose a problem. The problem with the variants is that they are more transmissible, more easily spread. More transmission means the possibility for increased hospitalizations and mortalities. It also increases the risk that the vaccines might be rendered less effective. These studies are actively being conducted now. Feeling confused? According to CDC, exposure to an abundance of news coverage, some of which has been conflicting or has changed over time, has fueled feelings of mistrust and fear. Even the unpredictable nature of this pandemic can add to the sense of confusion. For instance, on television, we have seen throughout this pandemic people sitting 6 feet apart or less without masks. This might send out confusing messaging. Oh, I guess if I am 6 feet apart from someone, I don't need to wear a mask. However, this is not true. How are these institutions, organizations, networks able to proceed in a way that looks as though everything is back to normal? Special protocols and testing. Testing often ensures that individuals within close vicinity of one another are negative. This is how important the layer of testing is in early detection and minimizing spread. Also important is strictly enforcing protective practices. Why is connecting these layers, wearing masks, social distancing, avoiding gatherings, and ventilation so important? Asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic carriers and transmission is what makes it challenging for us to proceed like normal during this pandemic. Symptomatic individuals are presenting with symptoms, so it's easier for these individuals to isolate themselves. However, there are some individuals who are pre-symptomatic, whereby they are not presenting with symptoms yet, but will. And then the truly asymptomatic who will never show symptoms, never know they are positive unless they get tested. Thus, with asymptomatic cases, there is no way to know at any specific time who is positive or negative for COVID-19. Even temperature checks cannot rule out asymptomatic positive cases. Asymptomatic individuals could unknowingly be passing on the virus to others. And transmission chains can start much farther back than the friend or family you are interacting with at the moment. Towards this end, gatherings can promote or initiate what's called a super spreading event, where one individual becomes the source of a network-related spread. Additionally, these protective practices continue to be important because most often we won't know who is vaccinated and who isn't. For now, even if we got vaccinated, we won't know if the vaccination is fully effective or not. Finally, the variants add new variables into the mix. One myth that is often perpetuated in indoor spaces is the idea that if we are sitting at least 6 feet apart, we don't need to wear a mask. However, why is it a good idea to both wear masks and physically distance 6 feet or more? Let's look at this visual. Do you see the smaller aerosolized particles? These particles are much smaller than droplets. Aerosols may contain infectious viral particles that can linger in the air for hours. Aerosolized viral particles can travel across rooms much farther than the 6 feet distance. Technically, both droplets and aerosols are airborne, but infectious disease and public health experts consider COVID-19 to be airborne in aerosolized form. These aerosolized particles can linger in the air of enclosed spaces for hours. This is one reason why wearing masks and continuing social distancing practices is important. How do droplets differ from this? Droplets are much larger and heavier than aerosols. Droplets generally travel a distance of up to 6 feet. Technically, this is considered airborne transmission, but is limited in range. Does the way we wear a mask make a difference? Let's look at some of the ways the CDC demonstrates how to wear a mask. What do you notice? In one way or another, a person who is not wearing a mask properly, where one's mouth or nose is exposed, is really like not wearing a mask at all. Properly worn masks, on the other hand, offers protection to both you and others against viruses like COVID-19. Here are some recommendations for mask wearing. Choose a mask with a nose wire that you can hold closely around your nose. If needed, use a mask brace to create that snug fit. Check for a snug fit that covers over your nose, mouth, chin, and sides of your face. Add mask layers if necessary. Knot or adjust ear loops if the mask is too loose. The CDC does not recommend the use of goggles or face shields in place of face masks. Some people dismiss the importance of hand hygiene and the spread of viruses. However, having worked in elementary schools for years, I can personally share how good hand hygiene has prevented me from getting sick. It is an easy practice that works. The COVID-19 virus that is shed by symptomatic or asymptomatic carriers can live on surfaces and objects for various lengths of time. Touching these surfaces and objects, then touching your face, could transmit the virus to you. This is known as fomite spread. Hand washing and hand sanitizing are effective ways to stop this form of transmission. If we have to be in an indoor space, what are some practices having to do with ventilation? When it comes to ventilation, the CDC also recommends a layered approach that includes all of the previously shared practices and protocols. Use a box fan in a window to draw fresh air in, or open windows to allow for cross ventilation. Limit the time you spend indoors with individuals from multiple households. Maintain physical distancing with individuals outside of your ohana bubble. Use an approved air filter. Keep moving rather than staying in one place. Isolation and quarantining for unvaccinated individuals remains the same, and isolation and quarantine are proven protective health interventions for reducing the spread of COVID-19. Isolation is when a person who tests positive separates from others. Quarantine is about ho'omalu, protection, because a person who thinks they were exposed to COVID-19 takes on the responsibility to separate themselves for the full 14 days. Although we might not hear a lot of discussion on the issue of what is being termed long haulers, the phenomenon is real and the impacts are lasting. Glance over the range of serious long-term complications on the right. All the more reason why we want to remain safe and protected. For individuals who would like to dig deeper into the academic words associated with this pandemic, a list curated from the module itself is laid out for you to review at your own convenience. I encourage you, if you would like to know more, there's videos, additional content on the modules that are on the PAC Info website. Mahalo Kumu for sharing your mana'o with us today. For additional content and resources, visit our PAC Info website. Mahalo.
Mahalo.